how does a province get, richer while its government is just completely paralyzed?
Right. It's a massive contradiction.
Yeah, because usually when we look at mundane forecasting, charts tell a pretty cohesive story. Like the arrows all point in one direction.
Exactly. You get a linear narrative.
Right. The economy booms because the leadership is effective, or, the markets crash because the institutions are failing. Cause and effect.
But this chart, I mean, it completely defies that logic.
It really does. It's suffering from this massive structural paradox. It is, it's like looking at a tree where the canopy is completely encased in ice, frozen solid, but down in the soil, the roots are frantically hoarding nutrients, just expanding at a record pace.
Which is such a wild dynamic.
Yeah.
It forces you to completely rethink how a state apparatus even functions.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when the executive branch is immobilized, that energy doesn't just disappear, right?
Yeah.
It routes itself through the path of least resistance.
Bypassing the people who are nominally in charge.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are sitting down today to unpack a real, working, mundane geomantic chart.
A really fascinating one, too.
Oh, totally. This was cast manually on July 30, 2026, and it maps out the week commencing August 3, 2026, specifically for the province of Quebec.
And our mission today for you listening is to decode the mechanics of this whole frozen canopy hoarding roots dynamic.
Right. And for those of you analyzing this alongside us, just keep in mind that in a mundane provincial chart, the province of Quebec itself is the querent, so it's the subject of the reading.
Right, and we're applying the traditional 12 houses to collective sectors of provincial life. We're leaning pretty heavily on Deborah Holding's framework here from the Houses, Temples of the Sky.
Which is a fantastic resource, by the way. But before we dive into the structural data, let's just quickly set our rules of engagement for this reading.
Yeah, that's crucial. We are conducting a strictly mechanical analysis of the chart's geomantic and astrological configurations.
Just the data.
Just the data. We are reporting things exactly as they appear in the figures. This means we are absolutely not taking any political sides regarding Quebec's current government, its counterparties, or, any specific policies.
Yeah, we are completely impartial here. The figures reveal a terrain, and our only job is to map out the mechanics of that terrain for you.
Exactly. So let's start with the overall atmosphere, because, the first impression this chart makes is incredibly stark.
It really is. You look at the ascendant, the very first house that sets the tone for the whole province's vitality and public mood, and we are greeted by Cauda Draconis.
The tail of the dragon.
Right. Which is, a pretty arresting opening signature.
Yeah, Cauda Draconis is inherently malefic. By its very nature, it represents the south node of the moon.
So it's a point of release.
Right. Release, shedding, draining.
Mm.
When you see that landing in the ascendant of a mundane chart, it tells us the province is entering the week in its state of civic depletion.
The collective entity is literally bleeding energy.
Exactly. We're looking at a period characterized by leadership exits, maybe dropping outdated identities, or just a general drawing down of vitality.
Mm.
The province is essentially exhaling very heavily.
But that draining energy right at the front door immediately clashes with these massive, immovable blockages we see higher up in the chart.
Oh, the Carcer figures.
Yeah, you have this incredibly rare triple appearance of Carcer, the figure of the prison.
Let's actually break down the elemental makeup of Carcer so you can understand why this is so significant.
It's a very restrictive shape.
Very. It's composed of single dots at the top and bottom. Those are the active elements of fire and earth, and then double dots in the middle for air and water.
So the active elements are literally fencing in the passive elements.
Exactly. It creates a structural bind. It's compression. And this figure lands in the 9th house, the judiciary and academia, the 10th house of the executive government, the premier, and the 12th house of hidden covert pressures.
So the top-level institutions are structurally paralyzed. The courts are gridlocked. The premier's office is trapped, and whatever covert burdens the province is carrying are just completely entrenched.
Right, that's your frozen canopy.
Yeah. But then how do we reconcile that with the sheer volume of growth happening at the exact same time?
Well, you have to look at the counter pattern.
Right, the triple acquisitio.
Yeah, we have a triple appearance of acquisitio, the figure of gain. It's Jupiterian in nature, and its structure points inward. It's about hoarding and capturing resources.
It's a hugely powerful benefical.
It is.
And it's sitting in the 4th house of land and opposition, the 8th house of crisis and shared resources, and the 11th house of the legislature.
Right, so you have literal material growth happening underneath a completely frozen executive.
Which brings up a massive question. If the premier's office is completely paralyzed and trapped by this cursor, who or what is actually driving the province's material gains this week?
Well, the chart answers that by pointing us directly to the fourth house.
The foundation.
Exactly. In mundane astrology, the fourth house represents the land itself, housing, agricultural roots, and traditionally, the opposition to the ruling government.
And the most grounded, benefic figure in the entire chart acquisitio is sitting right there, at the root level.
Yeah, the people, the physical territory, and the grassroots opposition are acquiring resources while the executive stagnates.
It's a profound shift in agency, really.
It totally is.
But the atmosphere permeating all of this, like the actual flavor of the week, is dictated by a figure that shows up 4 separate times across the chart.
Fortuna Minor. Lesser fortune.
Right. And that tells us a lot about the actual quality of the success we're seeing, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Fortuna Minor represents fire entering Earth. So think of a spark hitting dry kindling.
It flashes bright and produces immediate heat.
Right. But it has no deep fuel source of its own. It requires someone else to keep adding wood to the fire.
It's a total flash in the pan.
Precisely. So it creates this pervasive atmosphere of transient, externally dependent advantage.
So we are looking at a week of gain without governance, where the successes are highly tactical, but they just completely lack internal self-generating momentum.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So if the executive is stuck and the grassroots are hoarding, how is the province actually functioning on a day-to-day financial level? Like, when you look at the treasury sector, the second house, what is happening there?
Well, we get this really unusual double positive across the financial axis.
Which you wouldn't expect with a paralyzed government.
No, not at all. But the second house holds Caput Trichonis, the head of the dragon.
So the exact opposite of the tail we saw on the ascendant.
Right. It's the north node,
Yeah.
which is this entry point of voracious consumption and inflow. So there is positive financial momentum and revenue actually entering the provincial treasury.
Okay, but the 8th house is what really catches my eye here.
Yeah, that's the fascinating one.
Because this is the sector of debt, mortality, and crisis management, and we find acquisitio there. Gain. How does a province generate material gain from its crisis machinery? Like, that seems counterintuitive.
It does, but it happens by restructuring the burdens. When acquisitio lands in the 8th house, it suggests that the mechanisms of crisis, whether that means leveraging debt, securing emergency federal bailouts, or overhauling tax structures, are actually yielding a profit.
Oh, wow. So they aren't just making money through normal revenue streams.
No, they are effectively harvesting their own crisis management systems to accumulate wealth.
That is structural financial gain born purely from necessity.
Exactly.
But let's look at the social reality of this, right? The public morale sector, the 5th house, carries a missio loss.
Yeah, it's a Venusian figure, but its structure pushes energy outward and away.
So it's a literal dispersion. The public's enthusiasm, their desire for entertainment or, collective joy is just dissipating.
People are weary. They're tapped out.
Yet directly across from that, in the 11th house governing the legislature and institutional networks, we see acquisitio again. Gain. And this is where I struggle to map the reality, honestly. How can the legislature be consolidating and strengthening while the public mood is entirely deflated and the premier is frozen?
Well, it happens when the legislative body decouples from both the executive and the public sentiment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the assembly members, the committees, the bureaucratic allies, they're successfully passing provisions, securing budgets, and institutionalizing their networks behind the scenes.
So they are hoarding political capital in the background while the figurehead takes the heat and the public just kind of checks out.
Exactly. It's a completely decentralized consolidation of power.
That's wild. And we see a really similar split when we look at communications versus the law.
Right, the 3rd and 9th houses.
Yeah. The 3rd house of media, transit, and infrastructure carries that spark in the pan Fortuna Minor.
Which means we're going to see highly favorable but ultimately fleeting news cycles.
Like, the media will buzz with tactical wins, maybe a shiny announcement about transit or local infrastructure.
Exactly. It looks great on a headline.
But contrast that transient buzz with the 9th house of the courts and universities, where we hit our second cursor.
Right. The media is celebrating a temporary win, while the legal proceedings necessary to actually enforce anything are just utterly frozen.
The universities and higher academic institutions are gridlocked.
Yeah, it is a surface-level victory masking a really deep structural impasse.
And what about the civil service and public health? because the sixth house gives us via the way.
which is a purely lunar figure. It consists of 4 single dots, so it's highly mobile, fluctuating, and lacks any permanent form.
So it shows rolling change. The labor unions, the civil service, the public health sector, they're all in flux.
Right, there's constant movement, maybe strikes or rapid policy shifts, but there is no fixed direction. It's just restless energy.
Which is deeply alarming when you look across at the 12th house of hidden burdens, prisons, and hospitals, which holds our third cursor.
Yeah, the contrast is intense.
The labor force is restless and untethered, while the hidden institutional burdens are immovably entrenched and trapped.
Exactly. The hospitals might be literally at capacity, or covert institutional pressures are so heavily compacted that they simply cannot be resolved this week. The tension between that fluctuating labor force and the trapped institutions is immense.
Okay, so we have all these isolated snapshot moments. But a geomantic chart isn't just a static map, right? It's a dynamic process.
Very much so.
And the terminal figures at the bottom of the chart show us the actual narrative timeline of how these energies unfold over the week. It's almost like watching a judicial trial determining an outcome. Walk us through that sequence.
Sure. So the right witness serves as the prosecution, laying out the initial facts. It represents the beginning of the matter.
And here we have populace the people.
Right. This is water element figure, entirely passive and reflective. It tells us that the week opens in a state of collective suspension. The mass of the province is receptive. They are waiting for something to happen without any clear internal direction.
The jury pool is seated, basically, waiting for the spark.
Exactly. And that spark arrives with the left witness, which represents the active unfolding of the week. Here we get Fortuna Minor. So the week develops through those transient, externally dependent advantages we talked about earlier. The province is not generating its own momentum.
It's just catching winds blowing in from the outside.
Which leads us directly to the judge, the inescapable synthesis of those two forces, the verdict of the week.
And the judge is also Fortuna Minor.
Right. So the verdict confirms the unfolding process. Positional gains are achieved, outward successes happen, but they absolutely require outside help to hold.
So the success is real, but it's highly conditional.
Exactly.
And finally, we look at the Reconciler, which bridges the judge back to the beginning to show how the dust ultimately settles. We get Albus, the white one.
Albus is ruled by Mercury and associated with the sign of Gemini. It brings clear counsel, diplomatic communication, and wise, cautious articulation.
So it's peaceful, but it's cold and analytical.
Very much so.
Let me put it this way for you listening. It is like being a passenger in a high-speed vehicle. You are moving forward, you're securing tactical wins, you're making incredible time, but you aren't the one with your hands on the steering wheel.
That's a great way to look at it.
And when the ride finally ends, Albus brings you to a stop, not with a massive rowdy celebration, but with a very clear, diplomatic, Gemini-ruled debrief, like a highly articulated settlement.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. But if we want to know who is actually holding that steering wheel, we have to look at the chart's hidden mechanics.
The special factors.
Right?
I want to focus on the way of points here. For those unfamiliar, this acts like a diagnostic tracer die pumped into a plumbing system. By tracing the single active elemental points from the judge back up through the parent figures, we can find the hidden root cause driving the entire chart.
And where does that tracer die lead us this week?
It leads us directly to the 7th house, ending on Fortuna Minor.
Wow. And the 7th house represents Quebec's counterparties.
Ottawa, major trade partners, the open opponents sitting across the negotiating table.
This is a profound revelation. It means Quebec's external relationships are the unseen engine driving the entire week. The province is entirely reactive.
That's why we're seeing all this gain without governance.
Yes. The reason the success is characterized by Fortuna Minor is because the counterparties are dictating the terms. Quebec is merely responding to external movements.
That totally explains the passenger seat analogy. But what is the actual motive here? Like, the part of spirit tracks the true animating intention behind the week's events. Where is that?
The part of spirit lands in the 4th house, right alongside Acquisitia.
So the true intention of the week isn't political posturing or, executive action. It's elemental.
It's about securing the physical land, the agricultural bases, the housing sector. It's a fundamental root-level acquisition.
And to complete that picture, we calculate the part of fortune, which reveals where the actual luck, material rescue, and practical benefits are localized.
And that lands in the 8th house, also with Acquisitio.
So we are back to the financial machinery.
Exactly. The real material rescue this week lives in debt restructuring, crisis management, and the manipulation of shared resources.
It's all about the ground beneath their feet and the spreadsheets balancing the crisis.
But to understand the true durability of these gains and just the sheer depth of the executive paralysis, we have to apply the final diagnostic layer.
The traditional Astro-geomantic overlay.
Right, the Gerard of Cremona or Gerard of Sabbioneta method. This maps specific astrological signs and planetary rulers to the geomantic figures, which creates a whole secondary layer of context.
And immediately, when we look at the first house, this overlay radically alters how we view that draining Cauda Draconis.
It's arguably the most crucial mitigating detail in the entire chart.
Yeah.
The ascendant sign here is generated via the figure Letitia Joy. Letitia projects the sign of Taurus onto the first house.
And Taurus is an earth sign stability-seeking, patient, and grounded.
But more importantly, under traditional essential dignity rules, this placement exalts the moon.
Right. The moon in Taurus is in exaltation. This is one of the strongest stabilizing forces possible.
It acts as an incredible buffer. Yes, the Cauda Draconis is actively draining the province's civic energy and shedding outdated identities. But that exalted moon in Taurus gives the public mood a patient, materially focused resilience.
So it ensures that while the province sheds what it no longer needs, it doesn't just completely collapse, the structural foundation holds.
Exactly.
That makes total sense. But then I look at the third house, the media and communications sector, and the overlay gets incredibly complicated.
Oh, it really does.
Because the method generates the sign of Cancer here. And Jupiter in Cancer is exalted, meaning it has massive, nurturing, expansive power. So we should expect huge media wins or transit development.
That's exactly, yes.
But wait, Mars in Cancer is in fall?
Right.
Mars is in a hostile environment there, acting defensive and ineffectual. How can a sector be incredibly expansive and completely weakened at the exact same time?
Well, this really demonstrates how nuanced mundane reality actually is. We often want situations to be binary, but the overlay shows us two competing planetary forces occupying the same space.
Okay, so how does that play out?
The communication sector has the chart's greatest planetary asset with that exalted Jupiter, which represents genuine, expansive opportunities. But because Mars is in fall right next to it, any expansive announcement will be immediately met with ineffectual defensive friction.
So, like, a major highway expansion or a transit deal is announced. That's the Jupiter win. But the press conference itself is just a reactive defensive disaster driven by the Mars in fall.
Exactly. Both realities exist simultaneously.
That is fascinating. Okay, let's turn back to the 10th house. We need to look at the Premier's office, the executive deep freeze.
We already know it's suffering from the gridlock of Carcer.
Right.
But the overlay projects Aquarius onto this house. And Aquarius is the traditional domicile of Saturn.
The planet of restriction, coldness, and delay.
Exactly. You are adding Saturnian cold structural constraint to a house that is already compressed by Carcer and drained by the underlying mechanics of the chart.
It is a definitive double verdict on executive paralysis.
The Premier's position is structurally constrained by Saturnian limits. Literally nothing is moving at the top.
Which brings us to our final check. The 11th house of the legislature, which had that beautiful acquisitio showing massive gains.
Right, but the overlay places Saturn and Pisces here.
And this is where we evaluate essential dignity. Saturn in Pisces has none of the four major dignities.
It is completely unstrengthened.
It's present, but its energy is diffuse and boundaryless.
Exactly. So the legislature is aggressively acquiring power and resources through acquisitio, but because the planetary ruler of that sector is diffuse and unstrengthened, those gains are highly porous.
So they will be incredibly difficult to institutionalize.
Gaining wealth or political capital is one thing. Locking it down into solid, enduring law requires a strengthened Saturn. Without it, the acquisitions risk just slipping through their fingers over time.
So if we step back and pull all these threads together for you listening, the single dominant storyline for Quebec this week is pretty undeniable. It is a week of gain without governance.
The top-level institutions, the executive, the judiciary, the covert sectors are utterly paralyzed by Carcer.
Meanwhile, the ground level, the physical land, the crisis funds, the decentralized legislature, accumulates material wealth via acquisitio.
And Quebec is standing at a very strange threshold here. The gains are incredibly real, but they are driven entirely by external winds. That pervasive Fortuna Minor.
Because the unseen engine in the 7th house proves that Quebec is reacting to its counterparties, not initiating its own momentum.
And we really must respect the necessary sacrifice demanded by the ascendant. Quebec must release outdated civic identities this week.
So if you see leadership exits, institutional drawdowns, or, a depletion of the old guard in the news, realize that these are not accidents.
No, they are the required cost of making way for the root-level growth that the chart is orchestrating.
So, if you are observing Quebec this week, or if maybe your business relies on navigating its political and economic landscape, here is your actionable advice based on the mechanics we've uncovered.
First, do not expect leadership or movement from the top. The executive is frozen. Work from the ground up. The fourth house of land and grassroots opposition is where the actual energy is moving.
Second, pay close attention to the financial instruments. The eighth house sector of debt and crisis management is a highly productive, wealth-generating terrain this week, however unorthodox that may seem.
Third, price in institutional delays.
Yeah.
Do not be surprised when the courts or academic institutions stall out. That cursor in the ninth house is a structural reality right now, not just a temporary glitch.
And finally, as the week reaches its resolution, look for and lean into the clear, measured communication promised by Elvis. Diplomatic, highly articulated Gemini-style negotiation is basically the only way through the end of the week.
That's really the playbook.
We started this deep dive talking about a tree where the canopy is completely frozen in ice while the roots frantically hoard nutrients in the soil. And we know the material gains in land and shared resources are very real this week. The hoarding is actively happening.
But the mechanics force us to ask the ultimate question.
Right.
Will those gains actually become durable? Or will that completely unstrengthened Saturn in the 11th house allow this new wealth to quietly dissipate before it can ever be institutionalized into law?
It is all about what happens when the ice finally melts. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.